Well, welcome to another Funky Friday at 5. That was a theme song that I wrote for this occasion. Not only this occasion, of course. I'm gonna get in my chair here. But when I write music like that, it's modular, which means that I can do different things with it. So I don't want to make anybody dizzy. I'm just trying to get a good light here. This is something I do at 5 p.m. and I came up with the idea of the Funky Friday at 5. And sometimes I have guests, sometimes I'm alone, like today. And hopefully not really alone because I'll have audiences and listeners and so on. And sometimes I always have a theme. And this week, or this month, I should say, or this week, February, I want to delve into a brand new book by Chuck Klosterman, The 90s. This is the book. Better still yet. Any fans, well, if we're going to talk about the 90s, there's a lot of things to cover. So there's Chuck Klosterman as a writer. And this is Journey of an Aesthete, the podcast. And the most important thing, front and center, is aesthetics, which means artistic creation and style. And what that means is, in the case of the written word, prose style, which in writing is the most important thing. It's as important as, I don't know, if you're a soprano or you're singing tenor, singing in tune or something, or anything else. And so I want to spend at least a little bit of time not talking about whether Chuck Klosterman is right or wrong about the 90s or the 90s itself, but a little bit about his prose style, which I've always loved. I mean, I've raved about Joan Didion, I've raved about Caitlin Flanagan, Megan Daum. There's a lot of writers out there. Margot Jefferson is underrated, I think, just to name a few. But I think Klosterman is in a big league. I think he's someone who has a unique style. And interestingly enough, I have not a lot in common with him. I like a different kind of music than he likes. I'm not a sports fan like he is. I'm not obsessed with rock at all. And he's like a rock critic and into heavy metal. And he writes long, deep essays about the meaning of Kiss or Pavement, or Korn. And here's the thing. If you're like Chuck Klosterman, you really know how to write. Almost the subject of what you write is almost secondary. And I guess what I mean by that is it's like the joy. It's like, how, a really great actor, people will say, I want to see them read the phone book. I want to see Meryl Streep, Julianne Moore, John Gielgud, Laurence Olivier read the phone book. I want to see again, speaking as a straight male, I may want to see another kind of woman read the phone book, right? But the point being that it's not so much the phone book; it's like what you bring to it, which is style. And I'm going to just read. Now, this is sort of crazy. I'm going to read the first. We're going to get to the 90s. Don't worry. The 90s are important. And we actually, the other reason, aside from his wonderful writing, is his theory. He has a theory of history, which I happen to agree with, which is very controversial. To give you a little taste, 15 minutes early, his basic idea of history is humans have this vice, which I call presentism. He doesn't use that word. He uses other words, the eternal now or something, or I don't know. He uses, I don't know, but you could call it a vice, and it's a habit of not honoring who you actually were in the past, disregarding subsequent transformations. And it's kind of looking at things only. So it's interesting. Before this book, he wrote this book, thinking about the present as if it were the past. But what if we're wrong? I like Chuck Klosterman because he exercises doubt. He exercises free inquiry. He doesn't come ready-made with a bunch of conclusions. He's not preachy. I'm a Gen Xer, he's a Gen Xer. One of the things about us, if I may generalize as a generation, is that we're not interested necessarily, and this is only some of us, of course, not all of us. We're more interested in the freedom of discovery than we are having a conclusion. And we're not a big save the world type of generation. Saving the world or sort of moral or ethical improvement is much more, I think, the province of millennials maybe, or boomers or something. But we're the generation, that's the reason why we got, as a generation, we got criticized a lot for not taking a stand. But actually, one of his arguments about the 90s is that the 90s was the last era where humans could opt out of things. It was an era that wasn't compulsory. So even though there were things that everybody or a lot of people, here's the irony, okay? Like everybody would watch OJ chase, the Bronco chase. Everybody watched the Clinton impeachment hearing. But there was a mainstream, what he calls a monoculture, like the water cooler stuff. Everybody gets around the water cooler. So there's a centralized popular culture, but he makes the claim that in the 90s, and the 90s was the last time this was the case, you weren't forced to have a particular opinion about that monoculture. Like no one would get bent out of shape if you didn't care, and no one would really get bent out of shape if you if you had a bad opinion or even a questionable or dubious opinion. I mean, people would not like it, but they didn't have a parade or they didn't, in other words, it was before this idea of everybody having to have the right, correct view and having their being judged as people such. That's all, Klosterman says that's a characteristic of our present era. And he thinks that's quite unprecedented. I think he's right. It's a separate question, good or bad, we can get to that. But anyhow, prose style. I'm just going to read. I mean, I would be here all day. Look, if you gave me free rein, I would torture you guys. I'm sorry. I would read Joan Didion out loud and John Cheever. I read Margot Jefferson and just like wax poetic rhapsodic over what words can do and prose can do. I almost get excited about it as I do music. It's, chord changes and piano. It's all the same to me in a way. So here's the first. Look at this. Look at it. Any of you have a phone like that? Is it anybody out there that had this phone? Oh, one last thing. Post-its. That's 90s, right? I actually went, just for this live stream, went out and bought these little Post-its and put them in the book. I never do this. I've never done that. I just haven't. But I was inspired by rewatching, what is it? Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion. That's a very 90s movie though. So let's get serious first. The 90s began on January 1st of 1990, except for the fact that, of course, they did not. Now, to me, that's funny. I don't know. What? Decades are about cultural perception, and cultures can't read a clock. The 1950s started in the 1940s. The 1960s began when John Kennedy demanded we go to the moon in 1962 and ended with the shootings at Kent State in May of 1970. The 70s were concerned the morning after Altamont in 1969 and expired during the opening credits of American Gigolo, the movie, which means there were 5 months when the 60s and the 70s were happening at the same time. Isn't that interesting? So he's imaginatively reconstructing eras, and he's sort of saying, well, eras are real, but in a way they're unreal. They're artificially constructed by us collectively to try to make sense of our life, and he's having fun with that. And it's his sort of rock and roll. So he loves rock and roll, and he grew up in Akron, Ohio, I think. And so, and he worked in the 90s, he worked on a paper in Akron, Ohio, and I think that's fantastic. So he's a reporter. So that gives him, I think, a unique aesthetic than if he were another kind of person. If he was a reporter who was really famous in the 90s and worked for the New Yorker, New York out of NYU, a very higher end thing, I don't think he'd be quite maybe as interesting or as unique. I mean, I don't know. I'm just guessing, So it's just this kind of strangeness. So there's so many passages in here, but I think it's best. The New Yorker wrote a not a very nice review, I think, of this book, and they were very, a lot of people have been criticizing this book mainly because, well, they don't like his project of looking at the 90s from the perspective of the 90s. They want to look at the 90s from our perspective, so the perspective of 2022, with full knowledge of what was wrong with it or how we could do better. And since that's not Chuck Klosterman's project at all, I don't think they're open to something other than that. That's just a guess. But there's one passage that was quoted that I think I don't know. Here you go. No stories were viral. No celebrities were trending. The world was still big. The country was still vast. You could just be a little person with your own little life and your own little thoughts. You didn't have to have an opinion, and nobody cared if you did or did not. You could be alone on purpose, even in a crowd. Now, I think he's right, and I think that those aspects of the 90s were positive. Like, those are desirable. I think it's desirable to have a world where you can opt out, where, not everybody is thinking the exact damn thing. At the same time, of course, the internet happened. The internet, everything's simultaneous. The phrase he uses in this book, which I like, is jammed together. Now, I had misremembered. I thought he had said shoved together. And I thought, well, that's an age, our age now, the internet age is kind of based on rudeness, right? Because, a pop-up is rude. Like, if you're trying to do business on the computer and you have all these pop-ups, but that's, in the older world, in the analog world, that would be like sort of entering somebody's room without knocking, in a way. And that's kind of our whole world is sort of like that, right? So again, there's a lot of things wrong, and of course, but I don't want to, say it's all wrong, because we have this show, and the show is made possible by the very thing I'm now criticizing and dismissing. So that's the dialectic of it, right? So I love this book, and I do think it's a good sequel to But What If We're Wrong, or and so I highly recommend the 90s. It's really funny. He talks about, Chuck Klosterman has a little a tick in his writing where he'll say something really bold. Excuse me. He'll say, like, he'll take a famous figure, let's say a rock star or a politician, who does something that is kind of not so great, right? They don't have a paragraph change. He'll say, but at the time, it just didn't really feel that way, or it didn't seem that way at the time. Space, paragraph change. He does this, and it's a way of, he's a stylist, and he's in his style, which is funny and irreverent, but also kind of homespun and sort of, again, someone from Akron, Ohio, not someone from New York City or Los Angeles, and someone that really loves the band Kiss. And so what was your host doing in the 90s? What was I doing in the 90s? Well, look at this. This is really crazy. I don't know. I can't find anything anymore. Look at this. Look at this. See this guy here? Where are we? That's Mitch Hampton. That's me. In a white suit. I bought this suit in 1990. It's the first suit I ever had made. I think 1991, and we had it made in Boston. It is cream, and I bought it for an album cover and to do some concerts in the early 90s. And that's interesting. And I kind of still have it somewhere, even though it doesn't fit me. I was just in my 20s, right? But look at this. Lincoln Center. November 1997. So in the 90s, I was playing Lincoln Center. Avery Fisher Hall. So, it's funny. It's not really possible for me to hate the 90s because if in the 90s I was playing the piano at Avery Fisher Hall and writing piano concertos and stuff, I mean, it wasn't all bad, is what I'm saying for me. But it's possible that somebody else could have had the worst time in their life in the 90s and wretched. And God, I wish I had somebody else here to have back and forth. I feel like I've said not enough, but I've said what I can think of at the moment to say. But it's funny. I look at this playbill and this old stuff has been memorabilia, and I read this book, and he's talking about so many things. But I like this idea of. Well, I like the idea that there could be three options. You can live in your moment. We're creatures of the moment. This is what's real, and we want to be true to who we are now. There's who we were in the past, leaving aside the present, which Chuck Klosterman thinks we don't do enough, or we too readily discard that option. And then what's the third? Well, the third is to deny the present and the future and just to live in the past, which I mean, cultural critics, I think, call that nostalgia, when nostalgia is used as a pejorative or a vice, I think somewhat. Although Tarkovsky thinks there's a good dimension of nostalgia, the movie Nostalgia, and he made a movie about this person living in Italy who was from Russia. So, but I'm saying that Chuck Klosterman was saying, well, let's use our intelligence, our thinking, and sort of imagine who we were when we were in a different world. We were different people. I was playing Lincoln Center. This year, I think I played at a gas station. I mean, what can I tell you? I mean, I'm playing out in my living room now, pandemic. I mean, look, I guess the important thing is wherever you find yourself, there you are, right? That's Ram Dass, and it's true. In that sense, we're all creatures of the present. But I get excited about prose. And I'm just going to read because look, I'm not trying to convert you to Klosterman. I mean, it may not be your thing, but it's my thing. I like it. So, where are we here? He's talking about Quentin Tarantino and how, Chuck Klosterman says that Tarantino's. Yes, that's beautiful. You were living in France in the 90s? Is that true, Maury? I didn't know it was in the 90s. I thought it was much more recently. That's interesting. I did all my travel in the 90s. I went to Italy. I did no travel really in the 2000s to any to speak of. But anyhow. No, I wanted to mention about Quentin Tarantino because I think Chuck Klosterman says that Tarantino's attitude is very uncontemporary. He has a very un-20s point of view. And he as a demonstration, he tries to describe Tarantino's thinking and casting Travolta in Pulp Fiction. He says, and it's, again, not the way people look at things today. In the 90s, Colorado. Oh, wow. So you were in Colorado on the MFA where I was playing Lincoln Center. That's interesting because, so that's incredible. That's incredible. That's just our producer talking about her life, which I love. I'm kind of got a strange, there's a part of me that's like Charles Kuralt or like, would love to do a morning show where I'm like a roving microphone. I'm asking, what were you doing? Tell me your story. I love to hear people's stories. Like, that's just a part of me. I can't help it, but, and he's talking about, how Quentin Tarantino saw Travolta in 1990. Okay. He didn't view Travolta as a commodity whose value had plummeted. He didn't. Not like it was a casting of Harrelson and Natural Born Killers, where the existing awareness of his TV career was supposed to complicate your understanding of his character. So that's a reference to the fact that Oliver Stone, again, a movie I don't like, and I mean, it has about, the only scene in Natural Born Killers I like is the parody of the sitcom with Rodney Dangerfield, which is really kind of brilliant Brechtian. That's genius, but the whole rest of the movie is just junk as far as I'm concerned. But that's a good 5 minutes. But he's talking about Tarantino was an artist, like his thinking about acting. Tarantino wanted Travolta in Pulp Fiction for the same reason he'd like Travolta in Urban Cowboy and Saturday Night Fever in Welcome Back, Kotter. The culture may have shifted, and within the aisles of the video store, all those performances remained unchanged. It's like the philosophical difference between viewing time as linear and believing all time is happening at once. See, this is like when I compose music. I'll have something from the 1930s, and then I find a way to sort of segue into something totally anachronistic from the 70s. And I find a way to put those together. That's kind of like Tarantino's thinking about Travolta. So he's saying, I guess he's saying that Travolta's always Travolta, I think, or there's something of him. So yes, Saturday Night Fever was behind him. Welcome Back, Kotter was behind him. He was middle-aged, or he wasn't 18. But I think QT was honoring that thing will always be there. And that's what that's what I like in him. I'm not going to use him to make some meta comment about an aging star. No, I love these features in him. And I'm going to cast him in this movie because I like that stuff. That's a certain way of approaching, I think, reality that he calls nonlinear. That's similar. That's kind of like me a little bit, because I think, there's a truth to linearity again, but it's not really that true. It's not really, we don't experience reality in, linear chunks of time that move in a straight line. I mean, there actually are as you may know, of course, religious traditions and also cultures that don't even think that's how things are. So it's far from a settled question, right? But I like that. And there's a lot in this book, and I don't know. It's fun. It's fun. It's also serious though, right? Because he talks about the Cold War. There's so much in here. Have somebody you want to have a beer with. Remember that they said that about W. Bush? That he was relatable. That he was. It's funny that there was a view. Again, I'm not trying to make a political statement, because Bush W. was sort of in a way like a folksy, regular kind of person that people felt was relatable. Someone you could have a beer with. But he says in here, in this book, that's the way we saw a lot of people. We were more interested in somebody being relatable and ordinary was almost like their selling point. Like if they seemed kind of what we would call normcore or normie, that was not pejorative. In other words, they were loved for not being unique. They didn't want anybody too weird. That's that kind of normie sort of which could be really oppressive. Again, I mean, God, that's oppressive, but it's also a criteria that may not exist anymore in a weird sort of way. So it's like, it was more important that somebody can sort of tell a joke and be just kind of a regular guy than anything else about them. Like, it was more important than their intelligence, or it was more important than, and that's a criteria. But I guess he's saying, he was saying that's kind of our attitude towards Bill Clinton in a way. Now, again, putting aside, I do not want to get into a discussion about who he was. You can hate him, you can love him. But Chuck Klosterman's point is that him putting on the sunglasses at Arsenio Hall and playing the saxophone, that was kind of the 90s. And the 90s was sort of like, I think he's saying that that's not really possible now. That, I mean, of course, it's possible for famous people to do things like that in public. In fact, they may be electable because of that. But the difference is there was it's hard to really evoke what he's saying. The difference is that I think in the 90s, culture sort of appreciated the kind of silliness, or there was an appreciation for lack of gravitas, or appreciation for something being not earth-shattering. And I like that, actually. I don't think that life always has to be earth-shattering. I really have great sympathy for that. And I have great sympathy for the idea that that's not a good development. If a culture is always in kind of an apocalyptic, hyperbolic mode, a do or die mode, which is our culture now. Everything's like that. Everything's pitched at fever intensity. And that's a problem because first of all, you can't live your life like that 24/7 just for that, but also it's just, there's more, it's just, yeah. And so I think there's something to that. And that's what I take from this book. And I recommend Chuck Klosterman's The 90s. I don't know what else to say. I think maybe we'll make this a little bit short. If you want to have a symposium on or a seminar on this book and invite people, I'm certainly open to that. But isn't that funny, that picture? I don't know. I think what's coming up? I'm doing a lot of really interesting things with the podcast. I did a concert last Monday. I have, am I going to play my way out? Oh, music. Well, it's funny. Yeah, a little bit. I don't know. Have a good weekend.